your passion to business or entrepreneurship started for you?
My father was an entrepreneur, so he was an educator by day and an entrepreneur by night. Because he had one leg, he lost a leg to polio when he was 17. I learned a lot from that, but I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur. So in 1995, I went into corporate America. I had made too much money as a designer and connecting people to solving problems. If you're an entrepreneur or anybody, like, our job is to solve problems.
So there was a guy named Rob Janoff who actually designed the Apple logo. He actually probably charged anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000, anywhere between that, to Apple for designing that logo. For you, what was the very first misconception when you started doing graphic design?
I think one of the biggest things that I learned early on, though, was always push for quality. But if you do what you say you're going to do and maybe just a little bit more, you will always have business.
So please welcome Gary Frey on the show. Hey, Gary, thank you so much on the show today.
RJ, thank you for having me on here. And it's our mutual friend, Damon Burton, who recommended that I take your call and that we do this together. So he's an amazing entrepreneur himself, that's for sure. So thanks for taking the time to have me on.
Yeah, truly appreciate it. So let's get right into it. I really want to know how your passion to business or entrepreneurship started for you, and what was it like for you when you fell in love with business?
Yeah, it's funny. I probably backed into it mistakenly because my father was an entrepreneur and an educator. So he was an educator by day, an entrepreneur by night, weekend, and summers, because he had summers off. And so because he had one leg, he lost a leg to polio when he was 17. So from my babyhood up, my father drug a leg. And so by the time I was still very small and, even 5 to 7 years old, I was brought in to be his fetcher of tools and the holder of things. And so I learned a lot from that, but I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur. So I thought, well, going and working for somebody was my lot in life. And I was a designer. I was trained as a graphic designer because I loved that, which was great, and I still do. But early on, so I was brought into my first turnaround when I was 28. So you got 4 years, RJ. But
Yeah, I'm getting there.
when they asked me to do it, I had no credentials. I had no belief that I was good enough. Imposter syndrome, which I didn't even know what the term was raging in my head. I always felt like I was less than, not good enough, etc. But when they described what they were trying to do, I had worked for a firm that had that position in the marketplace. And so I understood very clearly what they needed to do because I'd seen what we had done. So I'm like, well, yeah, I could probably help with that. And we did.
Exactly.
And we turned it in 9 months by just doing very similar, just very basic things like, price ourselves at the high end of the market, kill them with great service, with better creative products than anybody else, and doing what we said we would do, and then a little bit more. Like those really simple things that we did turned it, really quickly. And then I realized pretty quickly, beyond just designing, I liked connecting people to solving problems. And so I think if you're an entrepreneur or anybody, our job is to solve problems.
Exactly.
And not all of us have necessarily that gift, but we need to all understand, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, you need to be able to justify your existence by providing more value than what you take. Because without that, you aren't going to keep a job. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're not going to eat. So
exactly,
that's kind of how I got, kind of backed into it. And then and in my book, so it's called Silence the Impostor. This is it. And this is me. And so I did design this cover I did it on my
Oh
phone.
wow.
It's like I did it on this phone with my fingers, which is hilarious. Um, but and I don't want to be a designer anymore. I haven't been a designer for a long, long time. But um, I kept finding myself in these situations that needed problems being solved. But I kept seeing myself as a designer. Oh, I need to get back into this world because I went through partner embezzlement. I mean, I've been through some crazy stuff. You know, I'm 61 years old, so I've lived through some crazy stuff. But in most cases, people would be dragging me into roles that I felt like I had no business in. But then once I realized, wait a minute, tell me what you're trying to accomplish. And many times I
Hmm.
would say, I'm not the guy for you. I'm just not the guy because I didn't believe I was the guy.
Got it.
And you know, so there's a lot of stuff that happens up here that can really mess us up or can really, you know, benefit other people too. But there's a lot that happens up there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, uh, so when you were 28, what year was it? Like, do you have an idea about that? What year was it for you when you were 28? Any idea?
Oh yes. Well, I was born in 1962, so this was in 1990.
1980s. Okay, 1990, almost like that. So I
Yes.
just pulled out like one thing real quick. So there was a guy named Rob Janoff who actually designed the Apple logo back in like
Oh,
in the
cool.
early 80s. Yeah,
Yeah.
back in the early 80s, and he actually probably like charged anywhere from like 30 to $50,000, anywhere between that, to Apple for designing that logo. And he's still
Yeah.
giving that a gig right now on Fiverr. When I saw that, it was crazy. But for you, what was the very first misconception when you started doing graphic designing and starting selling it either as a service or whatever actually got broken, which gave you this like this belief like, this is possible for you to make an income with a skill that you have or you possess, because that skill is still with you, right? You actually used it
Yes.
for designing the
Yeah.
cover of your book as well. Like,
Yeah.
how was it like for you in the first place about that?
So, um, I got married in 1983 and we didn't have any money. Neither one of us did. And I was working, I actually worked two jobs. Um, and I also had a freelance business on the side. So from 1983 on, I've always had a side gig, a side
Hmm.
hustle. And my employers all knew about it. They all approved it, all that kind of stuff. Now it's changed over the years. It's moved into more consulting and coaching, not designing, because like quite frankly anything that I design is just for me now, and it's with really
Exactly.
simple apps that are on my phone because I'm not staying current on Adobe Photoshop and all the, you know, all the you know, software programs that are out there now. You know, a lot of them are still some of the same. The Adobe suites are still kind of the benchmark, but nonetheless, I got out of that world officially when I went into corporate America in 1995. So 1995, I went into corporate America reluctantly, but is because I had made too much money as a designer and as a runner, as an owner of an ad agency. And I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't New York City, so nobody would hire me because, hey, you've been president of your own company, you're making too much money, blah blah. And it wasn't that I was rich; it was just I was making more than they wanted to pay.
Mm,
So a bank hired me to handle advertising for them, and then I became a problem solver within the bank that went way beyond advertising. And so those are the kind of things that kept pulling me. But what I realized is, like, you know, I had skills, and so people would come to me. Initially, I was hustling. You know, I was out there knocking on doors, hey, showing my portfolio. Now you can do that online, but there was no
exactly.
thing as the internet at the time, so you
Yeah.
couldn't do that. You had to have your portfolio, and I had it in a uh, fireproof safe, you know, because that's all I had. That's all I had. You know, we didn't have digital copies of anything. They were all hard
True.
copies, and so you spend a lot of money on that kind of stuff. So the barriers to entry are much lower, but then you also have a lot of people like on Fiverr that'll do stuff for $5 that we were charging thousands of dollars for. It's like, so I think one of the biggest things that I learned early on, though, was always push for quality, always make sure that you are delivering more value, not price, than what somebody's expecting. And if you do that and you do what you say you're going to do, because a lot of people don't, there's a lot of
Hmm.
false promises out there. But if you do what you say you're going to do and maybe just a little bit more, you will always have business. You'll always have business, but you have to let people know about it. But if you go to serve people first versus, hey, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. No. And Simon Sinek really hits a lot of that too with purpose, like what is driving you? Because people can sense it if you're just trying to sell them something. But if you're really trying to serve them, and it takes a little while to earn their trust, but then it's like a snowball that starts rolling down a mountain. It starts getting inertia and it gets bigger and it gets more powerful. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely interesting. And a couple of days ago, I actually posted something similar to what you said. Is once you realize that on the other side of the screen is also human, your perspective of marketing and sales completely changes, right? Because like when you actually realize on the other side that's a human, and then you think about like how a human thinks when you're marketing or selling, the perception completely changes. Even while how you're serving
Yes.
them, how you're having a conversation with them, how you're even like selling, everything just changed instantly when you think about that. So
Yes.
uh it is really interesting, first of all, to talk about like how things actually transition for you, but I'm really curious just to ask, since you've been into the corporate side and then running things independently for you for almost like 30 to 40 years, like for you, how you were able to stay relevant in the market even though pre-internet, and then like when internet came in. I know a lot of people, a lot of not only people, I wasn't born, it was like I born in
Yes.
1999, so but I've heard the dot-com bubble and stuff like that, how a lot of people out there actually closed their business because they weren't able to adapt. Same thing happening right now with AI coming along. So for
Yes.
you, how you were able to adapt and stayed relevant even until now?
That's a great question, RJ. As a designer, back in the day, we were using wax and paste up galleys for doing all of our stuff. We were doing photos, dark
Mhm.
rooms, all of that kind of stuff. I mean,
Exactly.
it was all very analog, very manual. And then when Apple came on, like, yeah, I was learning and doing 3D animation and 3D geometry, which is like crazy. At least I had the aptitude to do it, but on an Amiga, which was an inexpensive but powerful computer at the time, and this was back in the late 80s. So I saw the digital revolution beginning to gain steam. The PC world was way cheaper to go, but Macintosh at the time, so Apple,
Mhm.
was gaining steam and they had a much more user-friendly interface. They were more expensive and they didn't have some of the same computing power, but you could see at the time, you could see, hey, this is where they're innovating. And so I
Exactly.
in the late 80s, you know, but way before you were even a dream, I went to the first thing for computer graphics at Pratt Institute in New York. And they had this big thing, and they didn't even have color printers at the time, RJ. They had the only
Oh
way you
wow.
could see anything off of the computer, they had to have thick coaxial lines and high speed lines, which were high speed. We would be saying that that was crawling slow, compared to what we have now. But
True.
Black and Decker, I remember seeing the ad agency that I think was based in New York at the time that was doing stuff with Black and Decker, and they were showing proofs almost like what you would think in Skype, but they had to have dedicated terminals, but they had no colored digital printers. So I was sent there on a scouting mission. Hey, is now the time to pull the trigger? And my recommendation was no, it's still too expensive because those computers were getting very expensive, et cetera. So we waited another probably 3 years before things started catching up. But even then, terminals with a Macintosh Quadra, they were like $12,000 a unit plus all the software. So
Oh,
$12,000,
that's
so
a lot.
it was a lot of money. And that was
Yeah.
$12,000, $10,000 back in 1990 is worth $23,000 now. So it was a
Oh, wow.
lot. It was a lot of money. So you had to think really long and hard about that. But learning is a big thing. Like, you have to be paying attention. And just because things are moving doesn't mean that you got to jump in yet, but you better be aware.
Hmm.
AI is another one of those things. There are a lot of people that I see, they have completely outsourced everything to AI, which I'm like, I can tell an AI image. I can tell a lot of times I can tell when AI was writing this thing on LinkedIn or whatever. And now you're also seeing people say 100% written by a human, which I think is interesting. And even on Amazon, when I wrote my book and when I was uploading everything, it asks you, did AI contribute anything? And
Hmm.
I can say, honestly, I wrote every word in this thing myself. Now, I also know people that spend I've got a friend that spent $120,000 to have somebody else write his book for him. He didn't write one word in it. But the point is, like, yeah, you got to know when is right for you. You got to be paying attention. But I think the biggest thing is learning, always being
Hmm.
curious, and adapting. Because, yeah, I mean, I've been devastated many times by financial improprieties, embezzlement of a partner, which is what brought me halfway across the country to another place where I started all over because my name was on the door, and I either had to destroy him or I had to destroy my name if I didn't out him. So I hated leaving my own company, but I did, and had to start over. And I think that part of it is just understanding your why, going back to Simon Sinek, and realizing, like, hey, nothing is forever. You better be relevant. But I think you hit a point, RJ, which is realize that there's a human on the other end of that screen, on the other end of that phone, across that table. But especially with everything, so much being done online, especially after COVID, man. Woo!
Hmm.
We're doing a lot of this because of what COVID did 4 years ago. And so,
Exactly.
but understanding that, like, AI can't replace that. AI can't replace your experience. AI can't replace your ability to have empathy and care for somebody. That's going to be in a higher premium, I think, as long as you're solving problems.
Yeah. Wow. And actually, I just got that quote in my mind, like what Steve Jobs said, like "Stay hungry, stay foolish." Right? Because if you go down that path and you start to like adapt yourself, it just changes a lot of things. And also, like, it's
Yeah.
pretty interesting the way that you actually describe like how things were in the past and now compared to like how technology even like evolved. What costed like $12,000 that time, it's probably costing like $500,000 right now with the same sort of like even more technological abilities, aspects, stuff like that. uh, but still, at the end of the day, there are still some things which are even on a paper might even hold like more value. Like sometimes like a letter sent to you probably holds more value than a message on a phone,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Some things from back just holds a little bit more value. Same for AI, as you mentioned, right? People are now writing like written by human because it holds more value in some case of legitimacy, right?
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. And so 3 years ago, I started a thing called TGI Friday. Totally grateful it's Friday because my last name is Fry. It looks like Frey, but it's spelled Frey, right? So I thought, oh, that'll be kind of a funny thing to do. But I wanted to do something to honor other people that have made a positive difference in my life. And I thought, I wonder if I've got enough to do for 2 years. 1 year in particular, I was like, I got to have at least 52. And I went through it and I had enough for 2 years. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. And it's just a 60-second video shot on my phone, but I wanted to honor somebody else. And this last week, so a guy that's a very well decorated war hero in the United States, and before he retired from the Navy, he was the head of Walter Reed Hospital, which is the military hospital where the president of the United States goes, etc. He's an amazing human being. Actually, and I still have this from when I did his video, but this challenge coin, these are very rare and these are very specific. This was his challenge coin, and
Oh, wow.
it was made specifically for him. And they had a very limited amount, like maybe 100 or something like that. But he gave this to me, very valuable. Like, could I sell it on
Exactly.
eBay and make a much money? Probably not. But I'd never do that. But it's valuable because so few. But he sent me a text this summer that basically said, thinking about you, you're an amazing human, grateful for you, or something like that. Very simple. That was worth way more to me than even this. And this is valuable to me. Why? Encouragement. A computer isn't going to do that.
Exactly.
A computer isn't going to do that. And that's one of the things why I like so much Damon Burton and his approach to business, because he is very human about it, not clinical and scientific. Yeah, he uses the science behind all of that, but he's very human. And I think the world needs a whole lot more of that.
Exactly. Human to human. Love it. So you also have a podcast which is called Anything But Typical. I would
Yeah.
love to know more about what's your definition of anything but typical as an
Yeah, I
entrepreneur,
like
as a
it.
business owner. So
All
would
right,
love to know
cool.
more.
Well, my partner who started this, I had been on his podcast, oh gosh, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And he's a whopping 34 or 35 years old now. He's about the same age as my youngest son. But he sold his first company when he was your age at 24. He
Oh,
sold
wow.
his first company. And he had to manage money. And so he ends up being good at that. And so he goes into the Edward Jones route of managing money and financial planning and all that kind of stuff. And he approached me little over 4 years ago now, about 4.5 years ago, and said, hey, man, I would love to start a podcast with you. I said, oh, I would love that. One, I like this guy a lot. Plus, I would like to learn from him. He's much younger than me, right? I'd like to learn from him. And I think it'd be fun. Like I'm a team guy. I love doing stuff together with people that have complementary skills. So I said, all right, but two conditions. One, we call it anything but typical. And he goes, oh, I like it, but why? And I said, because we are all anything but typical. All of our thumbprints prove it. I've dated identical twins before I met my wife and married her 40 plus years ago. They didn't have the same thumbprint as identical twins. And you couldn't tell these two, you couldn't tell them apart.
Yeah.
Different thumbprints. And I said, we all have a story. Everybody has a story, whether they're an entrepreneur or not. Everybody that is breathing has a story. And I want to feature the stories of entrepreneurs, primarily in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the city that I love, because the two big banks and a couple of the big companies, I left here for 13 winters in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's very cold and it's a lot of snow there. And, I met a lot of great people, but the winters were terrible. And I hated leaving Charlotte, but we didn't have a big ecosystem of entrepreneurs yet at the time. We had some, but not as robust as it is now. So I want to feature those people that are willing to tell the behind the scenes stories, kind of the difficulties, because it's lonely when you're running a company. It's hard. Cash flow can be difficult, and telling your wife, oh, by the way, we're going to go without a paycheck so that we can make payroll. Been there and done that more than once. It's a lonely road. But if they are doing it right, I wanted to feature stories of people that would bring encouragement to others because they were vulnerable. So Damon Burton has been on it as well. So
Yeah.
that's why anything but typical. And so we've we're entering our 5th year, so we've finished 4 years, and we just release every other week. And we've not been promoting it in a big way or anything like that, but it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so Australia is our second largest market, but we have listeners all over the globe from these really cool stories. So that's why anything but typical.
Love it. Love it. I mean, like, it's when I heard the name for the first time, it just gave me the realization of everybody sort of like, devalue themselves of how they actually are or how they perceive themselves, even in general. But when they start to
Yes.
realize like how valuable they are, it just shows that they are everything but typical, right? So that's something that
Yes,
got into my mind when I heard about it for the first time.
that's exactly right. That's the whole point. And actually, that is one of the 7 weapons. It's number 6 in what can silence this imposter syndrome of feeling like I'm not good enough, I'm in over my head, I don't know what I'm doing, I have to outwork everybody else just to keep up. All of these things, or hey, I'm a fraud, people think I'm this way, but I'm really that way. Celebrating and weapon number 6 is celebrate the anything but typical in yourself and others versus comparing yourself to everybody else,
Yeah.
because that comparison kills gratitude so many times. Oh, well, gosh, I wish I was tall like this guy. Well, I'm short, I'm 5'8". I have 2 friends that are 6 feet 10, 2, and they are like giants compared to me. I never think of them until I see a picture with myself. I'm like, oh yeah, man, I am one short runt compared to these guys. But
Yeah.
celebrate their uniqueness, and I'll celebrate mine. And it took me way too
Exactly.
long to do that. You're blessed that you're 24 and you're realizing some of this stuff. But that is an important thing. And the other thing, RJ, like, I hid this for a long time. I'm a college dropout. I went 2 years in college, had a full-time offer at the height of the greatest levels of unemployment since the Great Depression in the United States in 1982. And my full ride scholarship went away as soon as I took that job, and it was $10,000 and $10,500 a year, no benefits. For in the United States, that was like poverty level.
Hmm.
Well, my advisor said, take it. Well, if you're a designer, because she said, Gary, your portfolio is all you got. So just you're working for a great mentor. You're being, apprentice. He's like, I was an apprentice almost to him, and I learned a ton. But she said, you got to take the job. And I said, what happens to my scholarship? And she goes, it goes away. You don't get it back. I'm like, and she said, I've never told anybody to take it, but she said, I can't get grads to find jobs. It was very high. I mean, interest rates at that time for a house were at like 16%, almost 3 times what they are here in the United States now. So I did it, but when I got out of the graphic design business, I didn't have a portfolio I could stand on. I didn't have a degree that was a requirement. And so it was a long and lonely road. And it was only because of other people that had seen and worked with me that said, oh, hey, this guy's good. And they circumvented the HR process, especially in corporate America, man. It took somebody to circumvent the HR process that was higher up that said, no, we want this guy,
Hmm.
regardless of what he doesn't have on a piece of paper. So, you know, that, that's part of the story, but it took me way too long to understand. No, we're all anything but typical. Celebrate that versus compare yourself. Oh, because that will kill you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I really want to ask this from you. Like, since you actually launched your new book, which is Silence the Imposter, right? And Like it would be somebody would be lying if they say that they never faced an imposter syndrome. Like it's
Yeah.
not like everybody's like so perfect. Oh, we never faced the imposter syndrome. But uh, why you think so? Most people come to a point where they feel like they're imposter, even though they're going down the right path, and how to avoid being an imposter.
I don't know why it plagues so many people. They say 70% of the population deals with it. I don't believe that narcissists or sociopaths, and I've worked for both, I don't believe that they have the empathy or the self awareness to have it. But and what was the impetus for me writing this book, because I had barely even heard about imposter syndrome, that term, until probably 3 or 4 years ago. But
Oh,
I was coaching a CEO that had 10,000 W2 employees. 10,000. She's very good,
a
very good.
lot.
And she said, Gary, I don't know what I'm doing. And she got very vulnerable. And I said, Tana, why would you say that? And she said, I only have a 2-year secretarial degree. So I said, Tana, I think that's imposter syndrome. You run circles around all the CEOs that I know that have advanced degrees. And I'm not kidding. She's really intentional. She's very, very good. And then I realized so many of these CEOs and entrepreneurs that I've coached or that have confided in me, either because I worked for them or I was in a peer group with them, they said the same thing. And I think, um, so why? I don't know. I was a perfectionist from the time I was a child. I don't know why. I was the oldest son. It wasn't that my parents were mean or harsh or they expected far less of me than I did. I don't know why. So I can't answer that one. But I do know that that whole chasing an ideal and being in advertising only fueled it even more in the creative world, because you're always looking at somebody else's work, comparing your work to their work. Oh, mine isn't as good. Oh, I wasn't in as many publications as they were, whatever. And that just fuels that insecurity.
Hmm.
And so another one of those things is like, hey, and this one takes a ton of courage, but just admit what you don't want anybody to know. it's it's almost masochistic, but it is freeing. It's extremely freeing, because I carried for so long, because all my jobs were master's preferred, bachelor's degree required, all of them except for my first two out of college. The first two, that was it. The rest of them were all master's preferred, bachelor's required. I didn't even have a bachelor's. So I felt like I had to outwork everybody else. And a lot of times people that are accomplished, you have to understand it. Going back to Simon Sinek again, like why? What's driving you? And a lot of that case for me, it wasn't healthy. It was like I have to
Hmm.
prove myself. I have to
Exactly.
be proved to be good enough to be in the room with these people, even though I never
Yeah.
feel like I'm good enough.
Love it. Also, like it's just like comparing your lows with your highs. At some point, also sometimes at the end of the day, like cause that imposter stuff, right? Uh, well, first of all, it's pretty interesting, and as I said, I don't want to take a lot of your time, Gary. First of all, thank you so much for being on the show today. I will post up all the links and also a link to the podcast and the book down below, so people can check that out. Any
Thank
last
you.
thing you want to say before we round the show up?
RJ, I just take my hat off to you. At 24, you're doing this. This is really cool. I appreciate your initiative, your gumption, your willingness to learn and learn from other people. That's part of the podcasting world that I think is so fun, right? You get to hear these
Exactly.
people's stories, and there's a great learning opportunity there. So thank you for doing that. And I would just say, for anybody listening, that whole trap of comparing yourself with everybody else, stop it. Start experiencing, and this is weapon number 2 of what makes you thrive, the stuff that makes you come alive, not just strengths and weaknesses, but the stuff that really makes you come alive. Pay attention to that. And then also the stuff that makes you wither. And there's an exercise in the book. It's only 30 minutes, but I do it with every management team, and we've taken our entire company. It's only just less than 100 people. It's like 88 people. I've taken our entire company through this to just focus on what is the stuff that makes you come alive, because sometimes you realize, oh, I'm in the wrong role. I may be in the right company, but I may be in the wrong role. I want to do more of
Exactly.
these things. So those are two things that I would say. Focus on what makes you come alive versus the stuff that drains your tank. And then also celebrate the anything but typical of yourself and other people.
Love it. Love it.